Ja som mala pôvodne 20, ale 18 som zjedla. To je jedna holka, že býva niekde v Pardubci, ona mi to odtiaľ nosí, vieš. Takže... Ešte aj tetovačku. To nevadí to. Na troška posunie, to zaberiem.
No právě, právě.
Jo, při té vůbec světlo.
Když tak další pohled. Tak jsou tady mezi vámi i diváci, kteří nás viděli víckrát a i ti, kteří nás ještě vůbec neviděli.
Děkuju.
Tak možná pro ty, co nás ještě neviděli, tak my se věnujeme improvizaci a zajímá nás vlastně forma představení, kdy ta improvizace je otevřená, to znamená, že úplný minimum nebo vlastně skoro nic není dohodnutý dopředu. Všechno vlastně vzniká tady na místě. A to znamená, každý představení jiný. Ideální lepší diskuse proto, protože je pro nás velmi příjemné slyšet nějakou zpětnou vazbu. Nebo jakoukoliv otázku, která nás donutí se třeba zamyslet nad tím, jak pracovat dál. Třeba nebylo jasný, nebo prostě cokoliv, co vás napadne, tak je tady na tenhle prostor. Jestli někdo něco hledá. Jako pravou. Měli jsme domluvený na začátek, že začneme všichni v prostoru s nějakou společnou věcí a vlastně jenom ten odrazový postup. A že chceme 40 minut. paměť prostoru existuje. A myslím, že to prostě funguje. Takže si říkám, že vždycky to bude prostě tým profesec napadá. Protože Pedro takhle už jako nerozumí, že to nebo tak nějak pohybujeme se v různých jazycích.
Actually respond to that.
Potřebujete překlad z angličtiny?
Rozumíte? I guess, and then I have a question back at you. How much is there to respond to Argentinski steak? I mean, it's actually a criticism. Like, I don't really need to, there's not, it would almost be more interesting if I didn't understand what you were saying. Because if what you're saying has no content, then I would almost prefer to not understand what you were saying. And then I might imagine more, right? So that's just, it's a sort of like conceptual thing. Like, almost better if it's nonsense that I don't understand, right? Almost better at some third, like if I started speaking Spanish, it would make more sense because the only person in the room maybe would understand is Pedro, unless someone who speaks Spanish. It's just another way of thinking about it.
Just for me, I'm not sure if Argentin states brings market, I'm not sure brings terrorists.
No, somebody started out. Oh, I don't know. Somebody was doing it. Yeah, no, I understand.
I think actually it was like that but the listen said, and there was like a conversation with words. You said some words, yes or no, yes, no.
Because for me, part of states is a different part. Like, it started with our improvisation, flamenco and terrorists. Now today with yes and no. And after this, from like, their variation for this team was states. So for me, it was somehow far away from this team. You know, it was from a variation.
Yeah.
Flamenco. And so I didn't keep it like together, terrorist and states.
Right.
It was from like variation.
Because there started the food thing. It was the yes, no, and there was some other things. Yes, the sound of so I don't know why steak, you know, came out. But it was the language. It was steak, yes, no, this, yes, no, calories, no. Yes, and then started the theme of the food.
It's interesting for me that how speech becomes sound when you don't understand it. Like that's also what I mean. Like I almost like it better. You know, I spend a lot of my life hearing sounds that I don't understand, and so people's speech turns into music for me, and I can hear it as music, and I almost prefer it because then honestly because then I can imagine that people on the tram are actually talking about something with real substance, even though they're probably not. And so I can sort of romanticize that in a foreign country. People are having intellectual conversations on the street, whereas I know in the United States they're not because I understand what they're saying. And so I can romanticize and go, wow, they must be talking about politics or something, even though I know they're probably not.
But of course we do.
Yeah, you probably catch just as much as Americans do on the tram. I don't know that there's any society that is standing around the street. You know, but I can imagine, and I like it better actually, because then I can isolate myself in a way that I enjoy more. Because I like, for me, I don't like isolating myself. I never wear headphones on the street. I like the sound of the street. I really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite things to be on the street and to be listening. So if I'm not distracted by meaning, when people are speaking. It's not that I understand enough Czech to get by, but I can easily tune it out. And so then suddenly everybody's speech becomes music and I really, really enjoy that. It's one of the things I most enjoy about living in a foreign culture or being in a foreign culture. Because suddenly people's speech becomes, when I understand it all, it becomes meaningful and it interrupts the sort of symphony of sound that I enjoy. I mean, I know that most people don't imagine the sounds on the street that way, but it actually would be helpful. I think it's a nice concept. Rather than isolating yourself with the same iPod tunes that you listen to all the time wherever you go, I think it's more interesting to listen.
There's definitely more poetry.
Absolutely.
In when you don't understand. Vlastně, když se člověk zaměří na to, jak to zní ta řeč, ty zvuky na barvy, tak je to víc takový poetický. Ten význam těch slov nás už přesně zavádí. Ale to je právě pro mě hrozně zajímavá škála, na který se dá pohybovat. Od prostě jasného stejku až po vzduch. A vlastně tam je hrozně moc barev v tom hlasu. Je to platforma, na který určitě ráda zkoumala. Co se s tím dá?
Snažíš sa, aby ťa to, čo si zažil, neblokovalo, ale aby ťa to obohatilo.
Acceptable? Very much. Can I answer that last question? What was the question exactly?
If it's possible to say, what was the best improvisation during the whole year? Like, when we look back.
Yeah, but that's really hard. It's even, yeah, everybody's opinion is even different of any particular moment or improvisation. I mean, I think different people have different goals with, or maybe better to say, there are various things happening at the same time in an improvisation, and so it makes it a little tricky, because if you're trying, to be like a truly pure improviser may actually make a shitty performance, actually, because if you're so in the moment, it might actually not, a good improvisation isn't necessarily a good performance for the audience. And so I'm always struggling with how to make it somewhere in the middle, because I feel a commitment to the audience, because we invited you and you're sitting there, and so I don't necessarily want to experiment the whole time, because it may not necessarily be interesting to watch the experimental process. But at the same time, it would be very easy for me to just do things that I know that I can do. And if I just do a bunch of things in a row that I know that I can do, then I should just call it a composition, actually, and I should arrange it more and make it more structured, and then it would be more fair, I think, to the audience. So it's kind of I've been improvising for many, many years, and it's still a strange, there's a tension between the process and the product, right? And this tension is almost never resolved. It's in a way, that's the nature of improvisation. You can't resolve that tension. Yeah, if that makes any sense.
For me, the content is also interesting, because I think that good improvisation is kind of relaxation. You're relaxed to do things how they are, and we as an audience, or at least me, like talking personally, of course, I can feel it somehow, and it makes me also to be at ease,
right,
and to observe you and play this movement. Because especially when this performance started, I had a neutral feeling. I was curious about the future. And at the moment when you start on the bus, it was an act of aggression for me, which started. No, it's not. And it started some moments which were aggressive for me, and it makes me to do this. Okay, aggression, okay, so take some distance. And I was able to be in a couple of moments, but now it's aggressive, and I don't like it. Okay, is it my problem, or is it their problem? Relax. Yeah, so I'm just talking about my feelings. Back to the first part of my speech. I think that good improvisation invites people.
Right.
There is no need to perform well, because I think that people should do it this way.
Now, would you still consider yourself invited the whole time, even if you were stepping back or felt like it was aggressive? Are you still involved in it?
Yeah, actually I was observing my feelings,
right,
but I'm so at distance,
right,
and I try to get to that neutral state, let's say this way. And there were some moments, also quite not really aggressive but fast, and there was some really interaction between you, which were again interesting for me, so I get back.
Right. Now another question is, at any point did you think about, oh, I forgot to feed my cat, or I forgot to pay the rent? I mean, because for me, I don't mind if you come and go, but what really is a failure for me is if then suddenly, You know what I mean? You look at your watch. Like that's now I've lost you, right? I don't mind if I attract you and repel you within a performance. I'm trying to do that actually. I don't want you to like all of it or love all of it. There's no way that is possible, I think, because everybody likes different things. At the same moment that you think it's aggressive, somebody else goes, finally, right? Somebody did something, and so there's all. You know, we did a lot of different areas, right? And so, but the main thing is that you don't, you know, for me personally, my main interest is that you don't leave and go away somewhere. And, you know, it's like that at all times we have your attention, that you forget about your life, that you forget about the outside world. For me, that's the most important reason to perform, is to sort of suspend you for an hour outside of the rest of it. That's just me. I'm not speaking for everyone else.
Talking about some food and nothing. Space.
Když se aha, ne, najednou si to začíná
Což je vlastně tohle, že třeba když se opakuje nějaká dynamika, že prostě třeba něco začne pomalu, pak se tam vystupuje, pak to klesá a teď se to tam stane jako 3krát za sebou, ten princip. Tak když ho objevíš a nepřijde ti prostě kompozičně zajímavé a máš to změnit, tak se snažíš rozšířit ty svoje schopnosti i jinak kompozičně k tomu přistoupit, ale nejenom jakože zvenku, ale najít jakoby zevnitř z toho těla ten jiný způsob. Třeba jenom reakci, která to nespustí tím obvyklým směrem. Dynamiky a prostě jakoby jsi v nějaký situaci tady a teď a právě zkusíš na to jakoby jinak a zavede tě to jinak, vytvoří to jinou dynamiku.
Někým jde, že nějak se bavíme, že trošku, aha, už nechci víc pracovat tím trošku, tak jako, jestli měli tu strategii, ale zase.
Je zbavit to, tak jako se třeba člověk trénuje v tom, aby byl citlivý k prostoru nebo timingu, tak ty kompoziční dovednosti, to je to samé, patří to jako mezi ty nástroje a s těma pak už nějak tvořivě pracuješ v ten moment.
Já jsem udělala jako víc na všechno. I've seen actually many performances, and I must say that this one was the most interesting for me. And I think for me it was the best if I can like that evaluate the judge, which I didn't find. But for me it was there was a balance between use of voice, tone or music or sound, words like speech, and movement and silence. So for me it was really very nice, and also space. So it was
We talked about the space.
It's the first time we performed this space we used to.
Yeah, we actually decided, because it sounds much better in here. The sound is...
It's just better atmosphere here. I feel much warmer here.
Yeah, I mean, if the other room is good if there's amplified music and a lot of people in the audience, but for a small audience and acoustic music, I do not like to play in that room. The sound just dies, and the room then feels too big.
You have to feed more energy.
Yeah, and it's too much energy. It's impossible in a way. I actually want to talk about just a little bit briefly the word composition and improvisation. They're not two completely separate concepts, and so there's a lot of overlapping. I mean, most improvisation that happens in the world is in the context of folk music, and if we call jazz and blues, it's also folk musics. And so actually the majority of music in the world is composed and improvised at the same time. There are themes and melodies and then people improvise on them. That's actually the majority of music that happens in the world on a daily basis. This concept of composition it's too long of a thing to get into here, but it has to do with money and modern classical music, because if you go back to the time of Beethoven, he was an improviser. Actually, Beethoven almost never played written pieces. He just played whatever he was working on at the time at home. He would improvise that piece in concert. He was a great, great improviser. The improvisation got cut out of sort of classical Western art music when they started publishing sheet music, and then they could sell it, and then suddenly the idea of improvisation was not going to make anybody any money. And this is those black people did or whatever, and it was like, or those folk musicians in some village, it became this real hierarchy, which I find really offensive, even though I am a composer also. So the thing is that like composition and improvisation at any one given time are sort of being mixed together. And so the idea that that sort of filtering, like watching, because we were talking about watching videos, and I've been listening to recordings that I've of myself for 30 years, and I think it's a good idea to listen and go, well, that doesn't work, so we cut that out, and sort of that becomes your practice, because your practice is what will then sort of like, in any given moment in improvisation, someone has has to make a decision to do something. It's really, it's a sort of fantasy that we're just sort of moving along with some, you still have to make a decision at some point.
Sometimes the decisions come easier, sometimes
Yeah.
it's hard work.
And sometimes it's a decision, and there are magic moments where I just find myself doing something and I didn't decide. It's rare though, and so I think if you just hope for that, nothing's going to happen. There are certain moments where you have to say, okay, do something here, and then, well, what is it that you want to do, right? And then so you have to go through the sort of catalog of things that you have in your mind that you know you can do at some given moment. I mean, there's no, there really has to be, I like the word conversation, where we're having a conversation, right? And, if you're having a conversation with somebody, what's the next subject? Some subject that you pick. You choose and it's similar.
I agree to some extent, but I think that also a big aspect in improvisation is to be surprised.
Yeah, of course, of course.
I don't know, surprise even people around you, or mainly yourself, basically.
Sure.
So this idea about composition and like having a catalog of things that you know you are capable of is perhaps maybe a good tool, or as you say, it's like a strategy, or strategic point, or strategic kind of approach. But to what extent is there still a huge space of nothing, and like working with this nothing?
In a way, that's
surprise.
I find that that's the goal. Actually, in opposition to what you're saying, in my opinion, what I work on is not to have anything behind me. It's very, very difficult, but to carry no luggage with me so that I can just be empty and allow things to come through me. But again, it's very difficult. And as soon as the composition comes, if I can refer to the same word, I try to take it, to not to do it, because I know that it might be a pattern, or it might be something. This evening it happened many times that I had to stop it, because I couldn't manage to go into it as I wanted. Because I see that as a pattern, and I wouldn't like to in an improvisation to give a pattern. Is it pattern? So in a way not to fall into this matter, but to extend it to pure improvisation, which is not the moment, which is sometimes.
But you think it's so you're saying that a pattern is not possible to be an improvisation is only non-pattern.
I wouldn't like to see myself, if I'm aware of the pattern, I wouldn't like to do it.
I guess my question is, who's making the decisions then? You still have to make a decision.
Definitely.
Right.
Of course.
And so, I would counter that just as you might reject something as being, how can I say?
I think I'm following.
I think that you're still making decisions. You're just cutting out certain decisions as being non-improvisational. But I say that's not correct. I mean, there are often times where I'm actually completely mindless and I just fall into some pattern. Actually, if I'm most mindless, I fall into some patterns because what I've done, I've spent thousands of hours in my life practicing patterns. So if I actually completely turn my brain off, my body will just actually do patterns. So actually, in a way, that's the purest improvisation for my body. It's just something repetitive because it's what I can do if I completely shut my brain down. My body will just start playing scales.
So it will stay.
So it's almost the opposite.
No. What you are referring to is habits. It's these patterns that I'm talking about.
You are saying that this is not conscious, and for me, improvisation is conscious.
Yes.
It's not mindless or brainless.
No.
Actually, you have to be very mindful.
It's extremely awareness of what you are.
Yeah. Then I say that then there's no reason if it's you are making decisions, this is kind of my point, we're circling around it. If you are making decisions, then it means that anything is possible because you're making decisions, right? So you could make a decision to do a ballet move, and it's still improvisation. I know, but now you're making aesthetic decisions and you're confusing it with improvisation.
I want to say that I wouldn't make a decision, not that decision, a decision.
But you are making decisions. Every time you move, you're making a decision.
I'm not making a decision. The decision will be made by me.
Sorry. You're making a decision.
Maybe you're making a decision.
Thank you.
I think that's a different way to see it. Because if I can comment on here,
Outside eye.
But from where? Where are you receiving the decision from?
From my inner self.
Then you're making a decision.
No.
We're just in a semantic loop,
yes.
but I don't believe that you're actually saying anything different than I'm saying. You would like to be saying something different, but you're actually not.
So maybe, guys, we can make this part about. Kdyby ovšem někdo z publika nechtěl k tomu něco říct, to můžeme vyřešit později. But if anyone from the audience has something to...
But for me this is interesting to see because there are like two approaches towards improvisation.
Yes.
Work together.
Because obviously it can work either way, even together.
you know that from the many improvisers, well, not so many, but from the improvisers I met, those that I could kind of resonate with, or all of them, they were talking about the same thing, but the approaches are different. Like the ultimate things that all of them are looking for is the same. Just the way how we get there is different.
Já mám otázku, mně se strašně páčilo, jak jste tu vyšli všetci, a ten týk těž. To je rovnako jak
To je naša hvězda.
No, já prostě to byla září.
Zacítila dvojka.
Jako celý čas jsem se
Už mála pár hvězdných momentů.
Ona na to Borčaně nějak jako keby zareagovala,
No
ne?
jasně. Bála se, ne? Proč bála se?
No vlastně.
To bylo strašně moments.
Já jsem si užila ten moment, když začala kněčet a když jsme začali na to margot ty zvuky vlastně. Už jsme byli nohama nahoru, ne? Tak máte ještě někdo nějaký komentář, podstřed?
Mně se pořád ještě hodí hlavou prostě ty
halušky.
Srovnané. Ty vzorce, no, nebo ty, prostě, ty zvyky, to, co člověk objeví, že je, že se mu vrací. A je to teda vlastně čistou improvizace je to, že člověk to má milovat a to zkoušet si to, nebo se s tím prostě hrát, nebo to se to snažit opustit. Co s tím?
Pro mě ta cesta skrz to je, jak to opustit. To přijmout.
Já myslím, že vlastně jste to možná tady měli vlastně docela různý odpovědi, vzhledem k tomu, jakou roli to má to rozhodování.
A to se úplně říkala, že každá má svoji cestu. Kam asi chceme.
Ale určitě jako první krok je, že, jak říkala Veronika, že musíš poznat ty svý vzorce.
ty tendence možná. A to je prostě hrozně moc o tom, jaký člověk je, jak běžně reaguje. Třeba jaký si mluvil o té agresi, že třeba si reagoval tak prostě to jsou nějaké naše, jako co přirozeně udělá. Poznat se vlastně, jaký člověk je. Mně přijde, že improvizace je dobrý nástroj k tomu, jak se poznávat. Což ale vlastně, že kdyby jako o tom mělo být to představení, tak s tím bych já nebyla úplně spokojená, protože je tam nějaká hierarchie, dostáváš se jako na pořádání. Že to není ten cíl, teda to poznávání se, ale je to součást toho, patří to k tomu. A i proto je podle mě, proto člověk tak zaujatý, že je v tom celý, prostě sám se sebou. No a potom, nevím, no, že to, do jaké míry to člověk chce měnit, tak to už to jsou ty jeho rozhodnutí, no, jak je vlastně s tím naloží, s tím, co o sobě zjistil. A já tam vnímám ještě takové věci, že vlastně to, co člověk opakuje, to, v čem je silný, jako dobré, to, co mu jde, že to jsou vlastně ty jeho silné stránky. A já si nemyslím, že bychom se měli snažit se naší silných stránek jako zbavit. Že to není cesta, že přijmout. A on top of that, jak říkají Angličané vlastně, že vydat se ještě, kde dál můžu prostě zkoumat. Ale nezavrhnout vlastně ty silné stránky.
Well, you heard various different opinions because we're all individuals, and so everybody, there's no right answer. I mean, even like there's no right answer how to play Bach, right? There's 15 pianists will tell you 15 different, well, not anymore, but that's a different conversation. But yeah, so there, you know, ultimately, I think anybody's individual approach to it should reflect their individuality to some extent, I hope. I mean, there are no real rules. This is the thing about improvisation. And there are real historical, now stylistic camps and fights. I've stopped playing with people because we just clashed aesthetically. I mean, there's no such thing as, you know, you can put 3 improvisers in a room and they can hate each other. I mean, it's not, it's you know, it's a very individual and extremely personal way of making making music or art or whatever you want to call it. And as a result, it can be very difficult because it's not pre-made. It requires, at least for me, you have to be really open and you have to really expose yourself, which makes the sort of personal tension, if it works or doesn't work, really, really high. And so, you know, it can be a difficult thing if people have different viewpoints how to meet. It seems like it would be easy conceptually, but it's actually not, because people can be speaking completely different languages. And I think that I know, because there are a lot of improvisers that I work with, musical improvisers, who have a very limited vocabulary, and you could call it almost composition at a certain point, because that's their aesthetic, and they just want to do this, and they've cut all of these other things out, finally, and there's a very narrow area. So, I mean, improvisation is just, it's a lot of different things, really, and each person's individual approach is going to reflect their particular aesthetic concerns, hopefully. And I think what happens over time is that people often develop their aesthetic concerns more and more. Certainly, if I'm just playing with musicians, I have very particular aesthetic concerns, and I mostly don't move outside of those now. After many years of it, I used to be more open And now over time it's becoming narrower and narrower because I want it to be, because I have specific ideas that I'm researching, right? And in order, you know, and in order to get better in those areas, I have to focus more and more and more. I'm still improvising in my mind, but the focus is narrower and narrower all the time because I've cut out all of these things that I've investigated, not interested, investigated, not interested, investigated, interested. Boom, right? So I think this naturally happens. That's just a natural tendency. But I've also been improvising for more years than I want to count because they don't tell you how old I am. And I've been improvising. I began as an improviser, and so it's been a long time. I've learned how to play music, and I can play music for people. But so it becomes such a personal issue, also, you know, which is also what's interesting for me, because when I'm improvising with these folks, I'm not getting some package. I'm improvising with them as people, which is really what's interesting for me. Finally, much more than, if I want to do something that has a label, you know, if I want to play jazz, I call up some jazz musicians and then we play jazz. But that's really no longer, I do it because I can do it, but I don't find it interesting for me. What I really find interesting is improvising with Stenka, not with some contemporary dancer, right? There's a big, big difference for me. I'm improvising with a person, not a label, right? And I think more and more now that's actually becoming a political choice because we're in a world where everything is a fucking label, everything is a brand name. I was looking at this poster on the street the other day, and I guess it shows how out of it I am with the contemporary world of music, but it was an electronic music concert. And probably like some oomph kind of stuff. And all of the performers' names were logos. I hadn't noticed this before, but it was like blah, blah, blah from Dublin, and he had a logo. His name wasn't a name anymore. And each of the 6 performers were brand names. And I thought, this is so far away from anything that I want to be a part of, right? Like, so in a way, I don't want to elevate what we're doing to some higher level or anything like that. But I do feel like it's a political choice at this point also to like maintain making some art as individuals, not as brand names or some fucking box. It really upsets me, to be honest, as you can tell. So anyway, sorry. Right? Is that okay? Did I ruin the party?
No, I agree with that. I mean, that there is a certain relevance. You can call it a political statement. It's a statement.
Or whatever, yeah. Maybe take that word out because it's so charged.
No, I mean, yeah.
No, but in a way, it's sort of perpetuating the sort of philosophies that I'm interested in, right? It's not to say if you make a show that's composed and it can still be relevant, right? I'm not saying it, but there is something about like what we did tonight that is completely outside of any possibility of boxing it in, right? This was the only time any of this was going to happen.
And
right?
we are not able to repeat it.
No, exactly. This is a one-time event, and that's what's really interesting for me, finally, I think. It's completely unique.
Mě ještě napadá k té otázce jako těch zvyků a toho, prostě jak to mění, nebo jestli to mění. Taková jedna zkušenost z workshopu s Josefem Fručkem, kterou používám sama pro sebe, takže trošku z těch teoretických už do praktického že prostě nechá nás dívat, improvizovat a potom uvědomit si, že vlastně něco opakujeme, nějaký pohyb opakujeme, prostě na úrovni čistých toho těla. A potom říkal, že změňte jednu jedinou věc. třeba jakoby fakt je tu jednu věc udělat jinak a že to někdy stačí. Že tím nestratí to svoje gro, ale přitom se dostane o kousek dál. Tak třeba to jakoby nefunguje. So, I brought it a little bit on a practical. But I think we have run out of the time.
Yeah.
It's time to go out.
Yeah, sorry.
Batteries Evropy.
Tak děkujeme moc, že jste přišli. Byli s námi. Další představení máme 6. února. Můžete přijít zas. Next performance. 6th of February. Chtěli bychom v příštím roce udělat pár nějakých workshopů